Well, here is the lengthy list of 12 Toronto Maple Leafs free agents, 10 of which are unrestricted. 7 forwards are UFAs, including Ryan O'Reilly and Michael Bunting. The Leafs have just 2 RFAs, but one of them a very big one, Ilya Samsonov, finishing his first year in the blue and white this past season. And so this is so perfect as we get to speak with our Bryan Hayes, Toronto radio star on TSN Radio Overdrive with Noodles and the O-Dog. I don't know how he does it. He works with those two every day, and he makes it look so easy. Hazy, it's so exciting to talk to you about this Leafs team because it seems to be more of the same. First of all, Brad Treliving says Sheldon Keefe is coming back next season, and our own Darren Dreger now reporting that a contract extension might be in the works. I'm curious to get your thoughts on both of these developments.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, Jay, because as much as there is a new GM, and you mentioned Brad Treliving, they're still the same president, and that would be Brendan Shanahan. And I think he puts forth the philosophy of the organization, and he's been doing that for a long, long time. And he is a believer in regular season success with the hope of paying off differently in the playoffs. I think he's content with that. And what that means is he wants to bring back a team that has been very successful in the regular season, and that would include the head coach in Sheldon Keefe. And, you know, Keefe in the playoffs has been a different story, but I don't get the impression like Shanahan evaluates the playoff failure and weighs it as much as he evaluates the regular season success and puts a lot of weight into that in terms of the decision he's going to make in the future. So with Shanahan still here, regardless of who the GM is, I think he's content with a very good regular season team, and Sheldon Keefe is a very good regular season coach.
All right. Also, Brad Treliving had this to say on Tuesday. He believes that he can get Auston Matthews and Willie Nylander to sign with this team long term. Do you think he can actually follow through on those comments, Brian? And what do you think those 2 contracts might look like?
I think the Auston Matthews deal, I wouldn't be surprised, Jay, if the framework of that deal was already established. That feels like a lock. That's a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen. The question is how many years? And I think if it's more than 4 years, that'll be a win for the Leafs. And I think if it's somewhere in the 13 million range, 13 and a half, that should be a win for both sides. Auston Matthews is going to be the highest paid player in the league. That's going to happen. The Leafs need to make sure they get term with that. So I believe that will happen. It may happen on July 1st. It could happen on July 15th. But I don't get the impression like they're overly concerned about that. It's the Nylander deal that is going to be tougher to determine. I think with him, you're again looking for term. I think the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal probably puts a bit of a framework together. Maybe it's $9 million, 9.25 for the Leafs to be comfortable. But if Nylander wants more, and he may be willing to play out his final season under contract and hit UFA status, then I think that could lead to some change here with this organization. If they cannot get a win for the team when it comes to the Nylander contract, then they would likely have to flip him, and I think that's probably what they'd end up doing.
Okay, but assuming they are able to get Nylander under contract, as Treliving has said, and assuming, as you said, that the Matthews deal goes through, and once again, you brought the core 4 back, and Morgan Rielly comes back, and you're essentially icing pretty much the same team you iced last season. I know how you probably feel about this. I've heard you talk about it on the radio pretty extensively. I don't know if you're too keen on it. How do you think Leafs Nation would feel about the fact that essentially Treliving would run it back in his first year as GM?
I don't think they'd be very keen on it either, Jay. And I think there would be some apathy. I think there'd be a fair amount of apathy within the fan base. And let's be clear here. When it comes to a Canadian fan base in particular, there's a certain percentage of fans that will go crazy about every possible detail, right? They could trade a compensatory pick and it'll trend on Twitter and people have an opinion on it. But that's probably 15, 20% of the fan base. The rest of the fan base, I think, look at this team and they associate the core 4 with basically everything that this team represents. Effectively synonymous. And if you include Morgan Rielly, the longest standing player on the team, you bring back Sheldon Keefe, those are the marquee guys. Those are the pillars. So I think there'd be a lot of apathy with whatever else happens. And there likely will be a lot more that will take place in terms of filling out the roster. But I think if you come back with the core 4, come back with Rielly and Keefe, what Shanahan and Treliving are effectively telling a lot of fans is we'll see you at the playoffs, right? Which is the message sent for the last 2 or 3 years. They're going to be a very good regular season team. They're a borderline lock to make the playoffs, and then they're going to have to prove that the changes are going to have an effect come playoff time, but that's a long way down the road.
Brian, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, but is there a move that you would like to have seen Brad Treliving make this offseason with either the core four or somewhere around the core four? Is there something that stands out to you that seems obvious but maybe isn't happening?
Well, I think it comes down to possibly moving one of those main guys. Now, it's not going to be Matthews, and it shouldn't be Matthews. It won't be Tavares because of his no trade and his no movement. So you're talking Mitch Marner and or William Nylander.
Right.
Those would be, I would pick one of those two guys, and I would determine which guy is going to bring back the most value and which one is going to allow for more depth to filter throughout the roster. And I think that would be a tangible change. Now, I would argue that the coach could have applied, but clearly that answer has already been supplied. They're not going to change the coach. So in terms of making a tangible change on this roster that will allow for more depth up front, and I think specifically a very different looking defense core, it has to be one of Marner or Nylander, and that's where I would attack it. I was somewhat expecting them to attack it that way. And again, they might, Jay, with Nylander, because I think they want to bring him back. I do believe they genuinely would like to bring him back. But if his contract demands just get carried away, then that will be the change. But it'll be kind of like the Dubas situation. It'll be changed because they're forced to change, not because they necessarily want to.
That's fair. Goaltending, always a hot topic. This is so interesting to me. That $6.25 million cap hit for Matt Murray looms so large over this team. And then you have the Samsonov RFA situation. And then you have the fact that Joseph Woll kind of finished the season and did quite well between the pipes at the end of the season for this Maple Leafs team. How would you tackle this goaltending situation? What would you like to see happen?
It all comes down to Matt Murray, and it all comes down to making sure he's not a Maple Leaf moving forward, to be blunt. And you have two options, neither of which are positive options, right? You either buy him out, which means for a team that wants to spend to the cap, you're going to waste cap on a player that's not going to be a part of your program, or you probably have to attach assets to trade him out of town, kind of like they've done in the past with Peter Mrazek. Again, both options are not ideal, but I will say this. I think it sets up for Brad Treliving to have one hell of a first impression on this fan base if he can find a way to alleviate the cap hit and move on from Matt Murray without buying him out and without giving up a significant asset. If he can pull that rabbit out of the hat, I think that would be a really significant start for Treliving. But I think you come back with Samsonov, you come back with Joseph Woll. It's long overdue that this team has a homegrown goalie. We're talking over 30 years, basically since Felix Potvin. I guess you could apply James Reimer to that. But Joseph Woll, drafted, developed, he looks like he's ready for the NHL. I think that would be a really positive story. So I'd go Samsonov and Woll, but it comes down to finding a way to get out from Murray, and that's certainly not going to be easy to do.
You know, Brendan Shanahan looked far and wide for a new GM for this team, and he was right under his nose the whole time. Right here, Bryan Hayes. Always great chatting with you, buddy. Hope you have a great rest of the week. It's going to be a wild one. Enjoy it, buddy. There he is, Bryan Hayes. What a good dude. Free agent frenzy. It's coming up Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Wonder what the Leafs will do. James Duffy will tell you.